Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the third and final webinar series in the Marketing the Value of Your Library. I'm Jamie Mochik with the Wisconsin Valley Library Service, and thank you for being here. We've had two excellent webinars already as part of this series. One on doing a communications audit. The next one was on persuasive writing. So now we're going to talk about how do we use those messages to get library support. You know, we hear about the word advocacy a lot, and we know it's important and we know we should be doing it, but what does this mean and how do we do it? So we have Patrick Sweeney here today to talk about that and to give us some ideas. So Patrick, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Jamie. So I'm really excited to be here and talk to you about this. Effective messaging for library support. I think there's a lot of things that we can do a lot better within the library industry around messaging. This is a much longer presentation that we do at every library when we're training our campaigns and our advocacy orgs to do this kind of work. So I'm going to try and cram it into 50 minutes. So I'm going to go a little bit fast on some of these. And I'm going to be brief and just kind of give some basic points. Now, the one thing I'm not going to do is tell you which messages to use specifically in your community, because that's not effective. You need to have the understanding of your community. You know your community well enough to know what messages to use when you're talking to them. I don't. One of the biggest questions that we get in campaigns is like, what should we say to get everybody to love our library? And there's no right answer to that. And we're going to talk about why throughout this presentation. So a little bit of background real quick. If you want to tweet at me throughout this presentation, heckle me on Twitter, whatever, you can tweet at me at PC Sweeney. You can also find me as PC Sweeney just about everywhere on the internet. There is a police dog in the UK named PC Sweeney, but other than that, it's just me. And so if you have questions or follow-ups or anything, feel free to reach out, and I'd love to answer your questions if you think of something a little bit later. All right, so why are we learning from politics? Well, every library is a political organization. One of the things that I learned doing a lot of this political work is we go to very far right conferences, we go to very far left conferences. And what I think is really interesting is just how far behind libraries are when it comes to political advocacy and political literacy, navigating the political environment. Politics spends billions and billions of dollars, or the political field spends billions of dollars every year putting messages out, testing messages, data, research, releasing findings. This is a politics is just a well-oiled machine in this country. The other reason that we're learning from politics is because 98% of library funding is political in nature. 90% comes from the will of the local voters, will of the local politicians. 3 to 5% comes from the state. 3 to 5% comes from the feds. That's about 98%. That is political in nature. If we don't understand how to navigate this political environment, how to use politics and influence politics, we're going to significantly start to lose funding for libraries across the country. And that's another reason why I think this is so important. If we look at what's happening in politics, this is from the study Awareness to Funding by OCLC. They did the study in 2008 and 2018. And what I think is really interesting, what this tells us about our messaging, is that maybe we're doing something wrong. So in 2008, our super supporters, the people who love libraries more than anybody else. There's people who show up to do your friends, they serve on your boards, they volunteer, they make donations. Those are your super supporters. They make up 6.5% of our population right now. Now, what's interesting is that in 2008, 80% of this population would vote yes for libraries. In 2018, we have lost 16 percentage points of voter support for libraries, the very foundation of what ensures that we have the funding we need in order to do our work every day. 16% is gone. They visit the library the same amount, and in fact, they even like libraries more than they ever have before. And they like librarians more than they ever have before. When I say librarians, by the way, I mean everything that the public thinks is a librarian. So throughout this presentation, if you hear me say librarian, I mean clerks, pages, directors, boards of trustees, volunteers, friends groups, everybody that the public thinks is a librarian. So they rate librarians higher than they did before. They're less likely to vote for it. Probable supporters, we lost 7% of them. 11% of them are less likely to vote for libraries now. They do visit libraries less, but they rate libraries as positively as they did before. They rate librarians less positively. That rating librarians less positively, if you look at the data and the verbatim in the data sets, you can see that really that's reflective of the fact that the librarians no longer reflect the communities that they serve. So there's some demographic issues, of course, within our profession that make that difficult. Now, what this tells us, though, is that our advocacy, our messaging, the work that we're doing is absolutely working if the measurement for success is that people like us more. But if our measurement for success is that people are willing to vote to tax themselves for the continued existence of libraries, we are significantly failing. And I think we can do both. And I think maybe we need to shift our focus in the way that we're messaging to talk about taxation, talk about the importance of libraries in a way that resonates with voters, not just making people feel good about libraries, right? We need to do a little bit more than that. And we need to understand what is political power. And political power comes from two big things. One is people, one is money. If you have enough people, you can start a movement, you can vote people out, you can sign petitions, rallies, events, all that kind of stuff. With enough money, of course, you can embarrass politicians. You can also influence them through campaign contributions and those kinds of things. Political power is important to understand because I don't think we understand this in this industry. The reason that many of our political leaders, or if you go to legislative day, for example, and your legislator won't meet with you, it's specifically because there's no benefit or consequence to meet with anyone from the library industry. We don't have people, we don't have money. We don't have a national database of library supporters, like, for example, the NRA does, right? They're very good at wielding political power. They have a list of millions of Americans, and if a politician doesn't meet with an NRA or meet with an NRA member, the NRA can immediately email 1 million people in that legislator's constituency and tell them, you know, who hates the Second Amendment? This guy, right? And we don't have that capability. Organizations like the American Legislative Exchange Council have significant money. They're funded by fossil fuels. The reason that they're able to get in with politicians is because they make significant campaign contributions. And the Sierra Club, the Human Rights Campaign, ACLU, they all understand this, and they all do this exact kind of work to build their political power and influence so that they can put their messages in front of legislators so that they can be heard, right? And we need to just understand that background. If we look at our current messaging model in this industry, it's very one-directional. You put up a Libraries Transform poster above the drinking fountain, and it says, because you can't afford textbooks on a ramen noodle diet, you point to it and you say advocacy, right? That's just one-directional. You read poster, geek the library. You know, I'm not just picking on ALA. I'll tell you how to make that Libraries Transform poster really effective in just a minute. Do not throw it out. It's still a good piece of material, but let me talk to you a little bit more about it. But everything that we're doing is so one-directional. We don't ask for anything back, right? And we need to start thinking about that, because right now we have this model where, you know, if we just tell people good things about libraries, if we just tell good stories about libraries, then the politicians will listen and money will rain down from the heavens after some kind of miracle occurs. And the problem is that we don't understand what that miracle is. There is a miracle there, but it's built into the messaging, and it's built into the way that we're talking to the public. It's not just saying something good about a library and hoping that something gets returned. You have to work the entire process. And we're going to talk about that too. In an effective model of messaging, what happens is that when you put something out there, you always have to get something back. So for example, on your Libraries Transform posters, turn those into really good campaign pieces, really good advocacy pieces. You know, just take a sticker, print out some stickers, put them on there that says, if you agree with this, like us on Facebook. If you agree with us, make a donation. If you agree with us, write to your senators. If you agree with this, letter to the editor. Whatever it is, whatever action that you want people to do next, you have to build that into your messaging process. Anytime you put a message out, you have to think about, now, when they hear this message, what should they do next? And if you can't answer that question about what should they do next, it's not a very effective message, right? Messages drive actions, and messages drive activity. They don't just make people feel good. It has to be one more. Make people feel good, and then what do they do with that feel-good feeling, right? We have to figure that out. because profitable messaging is sustainable messaging. There is no reason that your messaging or your advocacy or those kinds of activities should be a revenue negative activity. You should be bringing in revenue from your messaging. And if you're not, there's something wrong with your system. And all this means is doing very, very small things. I'm not asking you to put up a billboard. Nothing that I'm telling you in this presentation is going to cost you any money unless you decide to run Facebook ads. That's the only thing, okay? You don't have to spend money on bar coasters or posters or billboards or radio or any of that. All you have to do is think about, what do people do next? So for example, what you should think about is if you put a post on Facebook and you have a friends group or a foundation, or if your library is a 501c3, you can slap a donate button at the bottom of any post that you put on Facebook. And you should put a donate button at the bottom of every post on Facebook. And what you'll find is that by doing that, you're going to start raising more money than you are spending on Facebook ads, just because people will give. The other thing about those Facebook buttons, real quick, is that it totally breaks all the rules of fundraising theory. Every library can do some really cool thing that I think is really important. We put it up on Facebook, we get 0 donations. But if I put a picture of a cat with a book on its head, I'm going to get $1,000. It's just a factor of reach and virality. So put up those viral images, throw those donate buttons on, and start having, because you made that ask, you can start bringing that money. And we'll talk about the message to put at the top of that Facebook post in just a minute too. But things that you're doing should always bring something back. It should identify people. It should raise money, okay? Here's from OCLC's report. They did a questionnaire about the desired outcomes for libraries communication. And what I think is really interesting about this is that it's increased community awareness of a library, increased library use of a library, increased participation, increased traffic. And increasing library use is an interesting metric that we have, because what the data actually shows is that library users aren't necessarily library supporters, and library non-users aren't necessarily library non-supporters. And what that means is that somebody who uses the library or somebody who doesn't use the library are equally as likely to vote yes or no for your library. Whether or not they use your library has no bearing on whether or not they'll donate, whether or not they'll volunteer, whether or not they'll take any kind of action on your behalf. And we have this idea in librarianship that if only they use us, right? If we can just convince people to use us, then they'll love us. And that's not necessarily the case. Like, how many libraries are named after somebody who hasn't stepped foot in the library in the last 20 years, right? Like, we see that all the time. How many wings of libraries are named after people who have never stepped foot in the library? We ran a campaign in Missouri where somebody gives $150,000 every year to the library, who's a rancher, who's in his speech every year says, I'm giving this money to the library even though I'm functionally illiterate. I don't use the library, but I believe other people should, right? And that's a library supporter. And what's interesting is if we shift our messaging strategy to drive up support instead of use, is that people who have a propensity for using the library, that is, that they have a reason or a need to use the library, they will use the library. Everyone else who doesn't will still become a supporter. They'll still make no donations. They'll still take action. They'll still write to, still vote for you, write letters to the editor, or speak before local council on your behalf. All of those kinds of activities that we need from supporters to sustain our funding so that we can continue to serve the people that do use our library. So our strategy is to get supporters with our messaging. Now, messaging, of course, is only part of the puzzle. There's a number of things that influence people's beliefs and values. Things like social identity, social circles, political identifications, opinion leaders. When we talk about things like Cambridge Analytica or voter models or those data-driven activities that help identify supporters of a cause, this is the things that they're measuring, right? This is what Cambridge Analytica was looking for. They were looking for all of these kinds of different identities so that they could figure out who the supporters were in the environment so that they knew to spend their money on these people and that they knew these people supported us, so we don't need to spend money on them. These people don't support us, so we don't need to spend money on them, but these people are persuadable in the middle. That's who we target that with our messages, right? Your messaging should really target the people who are persuadable, your definite yes people, the people who are just all on board, they're already convinced. The people who are no's, they're already convinced. It's that middle percentage of Americans who are questioning, who want to know how their tax dollars are spent, who want to know who's spending their tax dollars, where it's going, is like legitimate questions. If you answer those questions with your messaging, they're going to move up to become some of your supporters. So that's how we start talking about messaging to audiences. In order to do this, we start thinking about messaging in terms of this ladder of engagement. And this ladder of engagement works like this. People are unaware of an issue. We target that audience who are unaware with a message that builds up awareness. So this is Libraries Transform, Geek the Library, Read Posters, whatever, all those kinds of things, so that people become aware. Once people are aware, we need them to become observers. For them to become observers, we need them to take some small action. Like us on Facebook, sign up for our email list, that tiny little thing that starts that two-way communication, right? That thing that you're asking for them to do next. Once they're observers, we can target them with messaging that's really more specific to them through the use of data. Once you do that, they start associating their values and their beliefs with the library. So you target people who care about education with messages about how the library supports education. Once you start doing that, they start, when they think of like, we need to fix education in this community, the first thing they think of is the library, right? And this is your ladder of engagement. Now you can Google this, but Obama's ladder of engagement was, nobody knew who Obama was, so they targeted audiences with messages about Obama, make them aware. They asked them to like them on Facebook, and then they started telling them what it is that Obama believed in, that aligned with what they believed in. And then on Obama's birthday, they asked for people to sign Obama's birthday card, which means you gave the campaign your name, your address, your phone number, your email address. Now they can target you for advocacy messages. Hey, there's a rally in your neighborhood. Why don't you attend it? Why don't you organize a house party? Why don't you knock on doors, right? Those are our advocates, and we can do that by following this ladder of engagement. Now, this is what it looks like blowing up. I don't want to dive too deeply into this. We are going to focus on, in the bottom, what is that, right-hand corner where it says A/B testing, problem, agitation, solution. This is where some of the messaging tactics that we're going to talk about today really fit in. But if you look at this is a lot of work. This is a ladder of engagement blown up. This is just a lot of work. And if you go from data, initial audience, education, contact, educated audience, that is Libraries Transform, Geek the Library, Read Poster, whatever. That is where those things end. In order for you to move on, you have to identify your supporters. You have to get some data so you understand them, so that you can then message them with things that resonate with them, so that you can target them with identifying themselves with the library publicly, and then becoming advocates, okay? Now we have 4 kinds of supporters. I want to talk about this because the messages work differently with our different kinds of supporters, okay? We have relational supporters. Relational supporters are the people that we know, the people who, I know personally, who I have a personal relationship with. Those are our relational supporters. Ideological supporters are simply people who have the same beliefs and values as we do. We don't know them personally, but we can create an ad audience on Facebook, for example, of other people who care about literacy in our community, and we can target them with our messages. Those are ideological because we have an ideology that's aligned. Aversion supporters are like, I'm voting for Hillary because I'm against Trump, or I'm voting for Trump because I'm against Hillary, but I'm not really for either one. We do see occasionally aversion supporters, like if you support a cause simply because it's against a cause that you really dislike, like they're fighting against something that you are really against, and so you are aligned in that, you are an aversion supporter of that. And we see that sometimes in libraries. Like in 2017, we did see a significant spike in the passage of libraries winning elections. That was largely because anti-Trump voters turned out to vote in favor of libraries because they were voting against Trump because he had just cut library funding across the country, proposed to cut library funding across the country, right? So we do see that. None of you probably have access supporters, though. Access supporters are people like, I give $2,500 to the Obama campaign so I can gain access to Obama. I don't know anybody in the library industry who's so powerful politically that people are throwing money at the library director to gain access to them so that, they can gain access to their power, influence, or whatever, right? That just really doesn't happen. But think about these all take different messaging strategies. Relational, you can talk to personally. Ideological are Facebook ads or posters or whatever. Aversion is, you're messaging about the other people, not really about yourself. And access support is you're talking about your political power and influence. So this is how messaging works. So we have the library. There are issues that the community members care about. Okay, so top issue, education. Middle issue, public safety. Bottom issue is economic viability of the community or whatever. We know that that community member cares about education. So what we want to talk to that specific community member about is education and how the library influences and how education benefits from the library's existence, right? And by aligning your messages to their values and beliefs, your messages resonate so much more. I'm going to talk about more how to do that in a more methodological way, okay? If they care about public safety, talk to them about how libraries are part of a holistic approach to public safety, because children who are more literate are less likely to grow up to commit crimes. They're more economically viable. You can talk to them about economy. If you go to Chamber of Commerce, they care about local businesses. Only talk about how the library supports local businesses, right? Talk to people about the things that they care about. Now, this all starts with audiences. We have to understand audiences in order to understand how to message to them. Now, we don't segment our audiences well enough within the library industry. We typically have 5, in almost every library I've worked at, we had 5 audiences that we messaged to. That was children, teens, adults, seniors, and parents, okay? Those were the 5. However, if we look at like Donald Trump's campaign, the reason that his campaign was so strong is that they had 1,200 separate and distinct audiences. Each one got a different message in a different format, and it's the right people, the right message, the right time, and the right format, right? Each one of those. And I'm not suggesting you need 1,200, but we need to start looking at like all these different things that impact, like how do we segment our communities so that we can talk to conservatives in the way conservatives speak, with language they understand. How do we talk to progressives with progressive language and the things that progressives understand, right? These things influence it. And by breaking down our audiences, we can have messages that really resonate with our communities, okay? Now we can get audiences. You don't have to spend a lot of money on them. A to Z databases is amazing. If we had more time, I would take you through building a really effective audience through A to Z databases, but you can pull lists of people who read science fiction, who make donations, who make over $75,000 a year, who are head of household, who, whatever. And you can build out with all those different demographic points, you can build out an audience, upload it to Facebook and run ads to that audience, right? And that's really powerful. Of course, you can create audiences on the back end of Facebook and social media. One of the things you should do is go to business.facebook.com and sign your library up, and set your library's Facebook page so you get all the deep, scary, like Russian tools that you can use on Facebook. If you don't have the black line across the top of your Facebook, and it says like pages or something in the top left corner, I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, but it drops down and you get a whole bunch of tools that let you do all this kind of audience work. Social hacking is like, if you want to find donors, go to the museum's donor wall and write down the name of everybody on that donor wall, look them up in A to Z databases and give them a call, right? Orange Boy, Analytics on Demand are like audience segmentation platforms from our vendors. And of course, you can build them. So like if you want to increase storytime attendance, every storytime, you should send around a clipboard to, and every children's program, send around a clipboard to get all the parents to sign up for your email list so that you start building that out. And then you start messaging those people who you know care about children's storytime with attending children's storytime, right? The other thing you can do is you can build them in a more urgent or interesting way. Like in Sunnyvale, we did a thing where we had super secret story time, and it would be out in the community somewhere at a random day or time, and the only way that you found out about it is if you were on the email list. And by like introducing that exclusivity into that email list, parents were clamoring onto it, and we built that email list really quickly. really drove up our story time attendance and that kind of thing, right? So there's a lot of interesting things you can do to build your own audiences. Pulling in big data, this is really important. We don't have any data about who supports libraries in this industry whatsoever. We don't know if people who are single mothers with 2 kids who own their own home and own their own business and are evangelical and members of Chamber of Commerce are more likely to support libraries, right? Do drivers of red Oldsmobiles or blue Toyotas, are they more likely to vote for libraries? Because if you look at the demographic behavior of the way people make decisions about all the things in their life, you start seeing that there's trends, right? And by doing like polling and by understanding data, we can start targeting people with messages that we know will resonate with them, things that they care about. We can't do that unless we build that data. So if you haven't done public opinion polling in your community, I highly suggest it. What's wrong with our data? I kind of mentioned it. We don't have any. We have no data on who to talk to about supporting libraries. We have no idea what kind of person is our likely donors, our likely voters, our likely users, our likely supporters, like none of it. And what that means is that our messaging is outrageously expensive and outrageously ineffective. By figuring that out, we could answer these questions, and I could know to talk to these people about children's services, these people talk to these people about senior services, talk to these people about economic development, and that really drives up the effectiveness of our messaging. We look at things like Cambridge Analytica. This is, in my opinion, a horrid company. So do not think that I'm holding them up in any way, shape, or form. They stole data. They did a lot of nefarious activities, and they used that data for some, I think, very terrible things around the world, not just in the United States. But all that they were trying to do, and all Cambridge Analytica was really doing, was figuring out who are their supporters, who are their non-supporters, and who was persuadable. And there's a movie called Hack that's all about this kind of thing and about their algorithm called Ocean that could determine whether or not they should talk to this person and what they should talk to that person about, right? Now, the thing is, Cambridge Analytica did all this horrible stuff. They stole data. They did all of that in a really nefarious way. But don't mistake believing that the Sierra Club, the Human Rights Campaign, the ACLU, the DNC, the RNC, like every organization is building these kinds of data sets, okay? To understand their users and what it is that their users care about so that they can message with them. Do not be like Cambridge Analytica. Do not steal data. Do not go for opt-ins. Don't steal data, right? Make sure that you are getting information from people that they want out there. Don't go around stealing data. That's not what I'm advocating for at all right now. But we do need to have a conversation about what privacy means in this industry, because we should never give out people's anybody's data. We shouldn't give out information about what people are checking out or circulating. All that should be kept private. However, we say that we're so stringent on privacy, but we offer platforms like Reference USA or A to Z databases where I can look up anybody in this webinar right now, and I can find out if you're a donor to children's causes. I can find out if you're a left or right wing donor. I can tell if you read science fiction books. I can find out if you're the head of household, how much money you make, how long you've lived there, whether or not you own your home. All these data points that we make available for free with a library card about any person in our community, right? So what does privacy mean? And I'm not honestly smart enough to answer this question, but it is a question that we really need to think about. Now, if our messaging is to be effective, if we want people to take action, there has to be a sense of urgency. And what urgency means is, why should they take action right now with this message? Why shouldn't they just wait 10 years before they take action? This is a big issue that we run into in a lot of campaigns for libraries. The library is ineffective at communicating why they should vote to renew the funding now and not renew the funding later. This is also like, if you're doing a donation drive, why should they make a donation right now? Why not just wait 10 years to make a donation? What is the reason to do it now? That's that sense of urgency. And you can create the sense of urgency with like deadlines around like maybe a celebration, maybe an event, maybe you have a fundraising goal. If you're on like any of the Democratic presidential hopefuls email list right now, like I'm on Elizabeth Warren's, and what you see is like she'll say, and we have to reach $65,000, whatever it is, we have to reach this goal, or we won't make it to the next debate. That's creating that sense of urgency around your messaging to get people to take action. If you don't have that, they won't do it. And what's interesting is that this timing matters. And messaging is really, really effective, but only immediately. If you wait too long to message, nobody will care. And what I mean is, like, when Trump cuts IMLS funding, if you wait 3 weeks until you start telling people about it, people are already moved on to the next thing that they're outraged about. They're not going to take action. So this is the way it looks when people first find out about an issue like cutting IMLS in this bottom left corner. People start to get outraged, right? This is just a model of like outrage. Okay, if you start your campaign there, as it drives up, you are going to bring in donations, actions, activities, whatever you need people to do. All of it happens in that beginning. After that, it starts to drop off, and it costs more and more money to get people to sign petitions, to take actions, to do the things that you want them to do. So that timing is really, really critical. So surfacing is a concept that we see often in libraries when these books come out. We see books from presidential hopefuls that come out like 2 years before Election Day. And 2 years before Election Day, these books come out because it's a way for the politician to introduce themselves to their community. Hang on one second. So these books come out, and what happens is this is how they're introducing themselves to the community, so that people know that people know about them. They know about their values. They know about their beliefs. And they're building a structure from which to message from. So, like, if I know more about a candidate, it's this awareness piece, right? In that ladder of engagement, it's that first piece, raising awareness about these individuals. If you don't do this awareness piece, then when you ask people to take action, they're not going to understand why they're taking action, right? And the surfacing also allows you to create, to fill the vacuum of messaging, so that when you start doing messaging, your opposition doesn't have room to get in. Like, whoever says things first and whoever says it loudest is most likely to win. Like, that's who's going to get heard. Right or wrong, truth or lies, doesn't matter. But if you fill the messaging space with your own message, the opposition simply can't fill it, right? And part of the surfacing process is putting messages out, answering questions, addressing concerns, addressing ideas, values, beliefs, and all that kind of stuff. And that's how you start building out this messaging infrastructure.
Patrick?
Yeah.
You need to take a minute or two to tend to your dog.
There's somebody standing in my front yard right now, so I don't know what to do about it.
Okay.
So, like, there's nothing I can do.
Okay, I just thought I would ask.
She's gonna bark as long. Yeah,
okay.
I know. Did you guys hear me yell at her?
No problem.
Okay, good. All right, so let's talk about theme versus message here. So I can't, like, I often ask libraries, like, what's your vision statement? And very rarely can a library just tell me what their vision statement is. And a vision statement is important because it's what you build your campaign around. That's the theme, okay? Theme is what you build your campaign around. So now both my dogs are barking. I apologize, team. Hang on one second. I am just gonna let them out real quick so they can be crazy for just 1 second. 1 second.
So if you didn't see in the chat box, the slides that Patrick is sharing today, as well as the recording, will be available on the WVLS CE page, and I've shared that link a couple of times in the question box. And if you do have a question for Patrick, a couple of those have came in already. We will take those at the end of the presentation. And the webpage is also where you can find the previous 2 marketing webinars that were part of this series.
So, all right, I apologize.
No problem.
So the theme is like what your campaign's message is built on. A campaign theme is like everything leads back to it, right? And theme never changes. So for Barack Obama, it was hope and change in the 2008 election. Now the message changed though. So when he's in like Iowa talking about change, he's talking about it as it pertains to the agricultural industry. When he's talking in Detroit, he's talking about hope and change as it pertains to the manufacturing industry. So the message changes, but it always reflects that theme, that vision statement of the campaign, right? So your message changes, your theme stays the same. So let's talk about language real quick. So we have a big problem around language in the industry. Something like 75% of libraries serve conservative districts. But 78% of librarians are registered on the progressive side of politics. And what that means is that culturally, we've developed a very progressive language about libraries, right? And so communicating our values within about libraries to conservatives is very difficult because we're speaking a different language. And like I said, we go to very far right and very far left conferences. And what I think is interesting is that both sides are saying a lot of the same things, but they're using such a different language that they just can't talk to each other. They say that there's a lot of the same goals, a lot of the same ideas even, but there's no communication because the language is so different between the progressive side and the conservative side. When we don't understand how to talk to conservatives about the values and beliefs of libraries. And that doesn't mean that we change our values. It doesn't mean that we change anything about the work that we're doing every day. It just means that we change the way that we communicate about it. So like my dad, for example, who I am really scared to ask who he voted for in the last election, okay? If I said I'm helping poor people connect to government services, right? That's not going to resonate with him. He's going to say why they should go get a job, like why are my tax dollars going to support people to get more my tax dollars, right? But if I say to him that the library's purpose is to give people the tools they need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and put themselves back to work, he's all on board. Now, as part of that process, I still connected them to government services. Nothing changed, but it fit in with his conservative values, right? And so that's the kind of language that we need to start thinking about. Like when they want to get rid of the estate tax, they called it the death tax, right? And thinking about like how does language work? How does language fit into our messaging? If we say certain words, then you're ultimately identified as the opposition or on their side or on the other people's side, and you can't have a conversation about the importance and value of libraries if you're using that language because you're already an outsider, right? So understanding how to communicate those values and beliefs of librarianship to both sides of the political aisle, I think is really, really important. We have no data about how to do that. We have no understanding about what resonates with conservative voters or what resonates with progressive voters, really, okay? So there's three languages of politics: progressive, conservative, and libertarian. And knowing how to talk to each one of those differently is really, really important. So we have 5 C's of messaging: contrasting, convincing, consistent, concise, and clear. Contrasting is important because if you are saying the exact same thing as the opposition, then why don't they just vote for the opposition? Why don't they just donate to the opposition? Why don't they just send somebody else's story time? If we're saying we're doing story time, but other people are doing story time just as great, why don't they just go to that one instead of yours, right? There has to be a difference. Like, why choose Pepsi over Coke? Why choose Coke over Pepsi? That's contrasting, okay? Convincing is, of course, we are telling people things that are true. We aren't saying like libraries will cure cancer. If you just give us more money, then no dog will ever get sick again, right? No dog will ever bark during my presentation again if you just give libraries $5 more, right? That's not convincing, okay? Consistent is like saying the same thing over and over and over again. Concise, say things in as little words as possible. Clear, of course, is using language that people understand. Don't use jargon, all of that kind of stuff, right? There's a reason that presidents speak at a 4th grade language level because that resonates with the most amount of voters, right? Without sounding too infantile, right? So that's why they do it, because it's very clear. So George Orwell, these are his his writing tips, and I think they resonate for us, and they're basically exactly the 5 things that I just said. Never use a metaphor, simile, never use a long word when a short one will do. That's concise. Never cut, if possible, cut a word. That's, concise. Never use passive where you can use active. Never use a foreign phrase. Don't use jargon. That's clear, right? All of those kinds of things. Now, if we look at further learning, and because I'm a librarian, I'm going to give you some reading assignments. George Lakoff is a progressive language theorist. I highly recommend reading the book, The Political Mind. It's very eye-opening about how to speak progressive language and some theories around maybe speaking to conservative sides and how the brains just work differently and respond to different languages. Frank Luntz is a Republican pollster who does a lot of work around the same thing, except on the right side of politics. I highly recommend reading them both to get a clearer picture of language and a messaging use on both sides of the aisle. Okay, they're both really great books. Now, stories, not stats. Stories are important because they convey emotion, they convey feeling, they connect you to they connect people to each other. So like, if I asked you, do you remember the national debt in 2008? Most people say no. Like, what exactly was that specific number? Most people say they don't remember. But when I say, do you remember Joe the plumber? Most people remember that. And the reason is because those stories resonate with people. They fill them with emotion. They connect them to the data. They connect them to the idea. They connect them to those values and beliefs in a more concrete way. So telling stories that back up what you're telling people, to validate your data, to validate any of the points that you're trying to make, is what really drives that connection between them and your message. And there's 4 different kinds of stories you can tell. Stories of successes, which are great. Stories of failures, which we need to do a better job of. This doesn't mean that like the library's terrible, don't vote for it. That's not what I'm saying here. But what I'm saying is like telling a story of your failure is like, well, what will new money fix? What will new support fix? What will new supporters fix? What will more people attending Storytime fix? What problems do those fix? That's important. Like, if little Johnny can't get into Storytime, right, he's never going to fall in love with reading. He can't get into Storytime because our Storytime room isn't big enough, or we don't have enough of them. He's never going to fall in love with reading. He's going to grow up to be illiterate. Illiterate people commit more crimes, which means if you don't give us $5 today to expand our programming, you will be stabbed and or shot and or robbed. Now, don't use that one, of course, but like that's a story of failure, okay? Stories about people that the audience cares about. This is really important. People care about specific other people more often than not. They care about people who are like them. And if you're telling people stories about other people, oftentimes they're not going to care. And this is a really unfortunate aspect of humanity. But if I tell people at Chamber of Commerce about children's literacy, whatever, they're not going to care because they care about business owners, right? They care about other business owners like them. I should tell them stories about people who started small businesses in the library. Stories that decision makers want to hear. Things. What can that decision maker tell on the campaign trail about libraries in order to back up what they're saying about their position on libraries? So in order to tell your story and for it to be effective and in order for it to resonate, you can't just tell it. You can't just go out and tell a great story about your library and have it resonate. You have to first identify an audience, then think about what they'll care about, and then you have to think about the story that you'll tell that specific audience. And if you just go out and tell a story, it's not going to work. You have to think through the process. Telling the what or the why. What or why is really important because often we tell people that they should vote yes for the library, it'll improve the parking. But people don't really understand that. They should vote yes for the library, or they should support the library, they should make donations because then we'll have more books. But we understand why those books are important, why it's important that they're on the shelves, why they should give us more money for story times or take whatever action for those kinds of things, because we understand why those are important. The public doesn't. You have to fill in the whys. What does Storytime do for the community? What does more programming space mean for the community? What does more chairs in the library mean? That is important. You have to tell those stories. Now, in order to get to that concise part, there's a 27-9-3 methodology for creating messages, okay? What this means is 27 words in 9 seconds to deliver 3 key points. This is pretty much just an all attention span issues. People typically stop listening or stop reading at 27 words, and that's the average. A 27 word is also the average size of a lead in a newspaper. It's what people read on Facebook posts before they decide to keep scrolling. 9 seconds is listening. You know, you typically listen to TV or radio for 9 seconds before deciding if you're going to change the channel, and then delivering 3 key points. So I'll give you an example in just a second. But you can typically do 26 words, 25 words. You can do up to 30, 35 words even. I mean, you'll still be fine. If you're doing 8 seconds to 11, 12 seconds, of course you're going to be fine. But what you cannot do is go over 3 key points. And this is so critical and important. Like, we want to talk to the community about all the amazing things that the library does. But if I go and I speak to Chamber of Commerce, I only want to talk to them about the things that Chamber of Commerce cares about. So small business, whatever. So the 2793 that I would develop for them is something like, and don't count my words because I have no idea if this is going to be exact, but you know, it's something like the library supports small businesses. So that's how I connect myself to my audience, right? That first part of that phrase connects me to them. Library supports small businesses in this community by providing market databases to help them do market research, a third space to conduct their work, and access to high-speed internet, or whatever your 3 things are. Now, you wouldn't deliver your 2793 and walk out, but then you would start telling those stories that I was telling about earlier. Talk about like the person who started their small business in the library. Talk about the person who used your database to find new customers, and now they have a growing business, right? You back up that 2793 with your stories, and that's all you talk about when you're talking to that group who cares about small businesses. If there's a PTA, you talk about education. If it's Rotary Club, you talk about some social services or some social problems in the community. Like, that's how you build messaging that resonates with your audiences. So here's a bunch of different organizations that you can typically do these around, but you think about what do these people care about? Who do they care about? Who do they want to hear about? What are stories of successes or failures that validate that 2793 that you just told them? A/B testing is great as part of your messaging system. A/B testing means like you test messages to see if they work before you tell everybody. So if I have an email list of 1,000 people, for example, then what I would do is I would do one subject line with one email that's exactly the same. The email is exactly the same to 100 people on that list, and to another 100 people on that list, I'd give a different subject line, and whichever one resonated with the most, got the most opens, the most clicks, the most donations, whatever my metric is for success, then I would send that to the other 800 people on my list. And that's how I know that I can start building out like these messages that are really resonate with my community. You can also do things like on one email to 100 people on that list, you can have the donate button be red. On another email, it can be green. Whichever one performs the best is what you send to the other 800, right? That's A/B testing. You can also do a direct mail. So like change the design of your direct mail. If you're doing a direct mail piece, send it out to this 100 people, that 100 people before you send it out to the other couple thousand people, and see what performs the best, whatever that metric of that measurement of success is. Now, staying on message, Bernie Sanders, love him or hate him, he is the king of staying on message. But like, if you throw anything at Bernie Sanders, he's going to get right back to his message. And it's really fun to watch him navigate this, because like if I've heard him do talks on radio, and it's like, well, you know, Bernie, what are you going to do about ISIS? And Bernie's like, well, we have to do something about ISIS. We have to build a coalition of support because ISIS is really terrible. You know what else is terrible? What we're doing to middle-class America, where we have to build a coalition of support to help figure out how to support middle-class America, right? If you're like, what are you going to do about Trump's vulgarity? He goes, well, Trump is vulgar. I don't think that's presidential. We should do something about it. But you know what else is vulgar? What we're doing to middle-class America. And it doesn't matter what you throw at the guy, he's going to get back to those talking points. And figuring out how to navigate that messaging environment, like have somebody throw these questions at you and see if you can get back to your talking points or not. That's a great way to practice for giving speeches or addressing those kinds of comments or questions or whatever. Now, problem agitation solution is a model of messaging that I don't think we use often enough. It means state a problem, agitate that problem by talking about how it directly impacts the person that you're talking to, and then provide the solution, which is, whatever it is that you want them to, whatever action you want them to take. If you are on any donor list, any political list, anything, they are doing problem agitation solution models of messaging to get you to donate, to get you to volunteer, to get you to attend things, whatever it is. So like, instead of doing something like putting up a Facebook post that says, come to story time at 10 a.m., right? And they're running an ad that says story times at 10 a.m. People don't learn anything about that. But if you say something like, children who don't grow up literate are more likely to commit crime. That's the problem, right? Which means that children illiterate, which means that if we have more illiterate children, you will be stabbed and or shot and or robbed. And so bring your kids to story time so they can fall in love with reading and grow up to be literate citizens, right? That's like a problem agitation solution. That's an extreme one. Don't use it, but that's one. That doesn't have to be negative. It can be positive. So you can flip that and you can say, children who grow up to be literate are more likely to earn more money in life, meaning they'll bring more money into our community, which means our community becomes more economically viable, which means you should bring your children to story time, where they'll fall in love with reading and become more literate, right? And that's your problem agitation solution. Let's talk about opposition real quick. If you've ever done improv, the rule in improv is yes and. You never say no. And the same is true for opposition, and that makes it really tough. But the goal, but that's because the goal of opposition isn't to get opposition to change their mind. When you're talking to your opposition, all you're trying to do is get them to shut up about being opposition. If they show up and vote no, that's fine. I just don't want them telling anybody else to show up and vote no. Okay. So like, for example, we've seen people get in arguments with opposition in the comments of an article, and then because everybody knew each other in the community, one of the opposition groups said, "Well, come over to my house. We're forming an opposition committee. We're going out after this library." Right? I've seen that happen, and had they just followed, if their goal wasn't to change their minds, but just get them to shut up, then that opposition group never would have formed. They never would have come out against the library, and the library would have won the election. Okay. The other thing about it is there's nothing that turns opposition out more than some punk kid arguing with them about how they're wrong. The best thing you can do is make them feel heard, right? And so the first thing you want to do, and a lot of times, like opposition, the reason that they're opposed is simply because they don't feel heard. And once they feel heard and listened to, they will simply go away. I've seen that happen so many times. So active listening, listen to them when they come up with these opposition statements. The library tax will be yet another tax that small business owners can't afford to pay. Oh yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that information, sure. Like you're writing something down, nod your head, just smile, nod, whatever. That's all great, okay? But now if we want to really address it, we can repeat and reframe it. And this is your yes statement. So yes, I understand the great burden placed on small business owners. That yes part of it is incredibly important. It's not no, it's yes, okay? Yes, the internet is a great source of information. Yes, our volunteers are very valuable to the library. The thing to remember is that the people that you're talking to who are opposed have had 30 years of life experience that led them to this conclusion. You aren't going to convince them of anything else in the 10 seconds that you're talking to them. So starting with them on their side from where they are helps bring them along to your position. So starting with that yes, and then and that's why we provide so many resources that make being a small business owner easier. And that gives them that next piece of information. We're on your side, and in fact, we're addressing the same problems that you're addressing, and this is how we're doing it, right? We're on this together. I'm on your team. I'm on your side. We're moving this forward. And then you throw in some examples. So, for example, we often have programming on hiring staff for small business owners, and we offer patent and trademark classes to teach small business owners to protect their property, right? You can even follow that up with a story. But this is how you create your entire opposition message, which looks like this. Like if somebody says there's too much tax on small business owners, then you can say, yes, I understand the great burden placed on small business owners, and that's why we provide so many resources that make being a small business owner easier. For example, we often have programming on hiring staff for small business owners, and we often have patent and trademark classes to teach small business owners to protect their property. So that's an entire opposition statement, right? And there's a number of other ways to address opposition, but I'm not going to get into it because this is a messaging presentation. Instead, we have a couple of books available from ALA Editions. Again, this is a really brief summary of a much longer workshop that we do with a lot of libraries. You can get a lot more in-depth information from here. We also have at everylibraryinstitute.org. We also have some webinars that you can watch at any time on a number of different things. So check those out for more learning. And then again, if you have any questions for me, I'll stick around and answer some now, but you can also find me on Twitter as PC Sweeney. I also run Every Library's social media, so you can find me on Every Library as well. Please feel free to reach out. I'm here to answer your questions if you have any. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. That was a lot of great information. I can see where this presentation would be something part of a lot longer, but I think it still provided a lot of food for thought for many of us. We do have a little bit of time for questions, and a few did come in. One of them is libraries are often very privacy oriented. So how do people respond to being targeted like this? So I think this was when you were talking about privacy. How do people respond to being targeted like this by a privacy-oriented organization? And does this ever backfire?
Well, yes, it does backfire. I mean, we saw it backfire in Cambridge Analytica because they did it in a really nefarious way, right? But like, there are people who want to get information about the things that they care about. They've opted in. They've told you what they want to know about. They've told you what they want to care about. We should give them that experience, right? Now, don't go steal people's data, don't go whatever else. But that is something to think about, is like, hey, I love my Facebook feed right now because it is all like political webinars and trainings and other political consultant ads and like all that. Like I love my ads on Facebook. It's awesome. And so like for me, it's like, that's great. You know, I don't want ads about whatever else, right? I learned so much from my ads on Facebook because I've taken the time to ensure that Facebook knows what I care about, right? And there's a lot of people like that. Like they want to know about story times. They want to know about why the library is important. They want to know about why literacy is important. They want to know. And the other interesting thing is that like, you know, what people call spam is just email that they don't want to receive. If somebody wants to receive that email, it's not spam, right?
Right.
And if we're sending out like newsletters because they're untargeted, that are just listing every amazing thing that your library is doing, we're doing a disservice to the library, but we're also not valuing the humanity, like how complex and nuanced the individuals within our community are. Like we have to value them as human beings to talk to them about the things that they care about. And I think that's important and brings a level of humanity to us, you know?
Yeah, to dovetail on that a little bit, another question that came in earlier was why you talked at the beginning about this asking and how we have everything, a lot of things that we have been doing are this one-dimensional, and we need to incorporate more of this donate or this ask. So why are we not good at that asking? Is it because we haven't had to do it? Has that skill or has that thought not been ingrained in our brains as librarians? Like why are we lacking?
I only have a theory, and my theory is that librarians are wonderful humans.
I agree.
You know, and like what brought me to librarianship and most of the people that I know who I really look up to in librarianship, what brought them there is like, we want to be able to provide things for our community, and we want to be able to do good things for our community. We shouldn't have to ask in this country for anything in return for good deeds. Like we shouldn't. Yes. Fundamentally, like that's how the world should be. Unfortunately, that's not how the world is, right? And so like getting over, like we have to understand that we have to find out what our community wants to serve them better. We have to find out, do you want to get emailed? Do you want to get direct mail? Do you want me to call you on the phone? Do you want me to text you? Like, how should we be having this communication process? I mean, if I send you this email, you know, is that something you're going to care about? You know, like those are, I think that allows us to have a much more human connection to our patrons, you know?
Yeah.
Because again, I'm not talking about like stealing data or anything about that. I'm talking about like, tell me, let's have a conversation about what you care about, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. What is your typical response when, and I know we all get asked this question of, why do we still need libraries? How do you respond that in that 2793?
Well, so I mean, but this goes back to us not knowing. Like, if I knew the person who was asking me, like if my dad asked me, I
Okay, let's
know his
say let's say
values and
you
his
don't. Let's
beliefs,
say
right?
it's a stranger
Yeah,
across the bar, and you're telling someone next to you what you do, and he overhears you. And why do we
yeah,
need
and then,
libraries?
but then it's a good opportunity for that exploratory conversation.
Yes.
Like, oh, have you ever used the library? Like, when was the last time you used the library? What do you do for a living? What? How do you get to and from work? Or do you have children? Or are you a small business? So, like, asking those kinds of exploratory questions helps put something in front of them they care about. Because I can talk all day. Like, libraries do a million just beautiful, wonderful, amazing things for their communities, and I can tell you about all of them, but you'll only care about like two of them. You know,
Ah,
and without having that understanding of those people that we talk to, you can't really answer that question in a meaningful way, right? I mean, I can talk about government services, but like, you can be like a big tea partier and hate that the government provides social welfare services. Like, I don't know. And now I've turned you even more against libraries,
mm, true.
instead of turned you more for, because I'm talking about, like, I helped a small business owner who, the factory was shut down. He didn't know what to do. We came in, we helped him start a small business, and now he uses our library for the market research and the patent and trademark office to do like whatever, and 3D printed a prototype. He's brought it some to market. Now he's making $100,000 a year. Like, that's a story that person might care about, right?
Sure. Sure. Well, we are out of time. So I want to thank you again, Patrick, for an excellent presentation and for this information. I feel like this ended our um, marketing the value of your library series in an excellent way. And I want to thank all of you for listening in today and for your comments and questions. And as I mentioned, the slides of this presentation, as well as the recording, will be up on the CE page of the WVLS website for sure tomorrow, if not later today. So with that said, thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. So long.